The violence in the Middle East seems to be spiraling out of control. With Palestinian terrorists intensifying their attacks on Israeli civilians, Israeli commandos are now responding to those attacks by assassinating Palestinians they believe are involved in the violence. And for the first time, the Israeli army is admitting it. But the generals are very careful not to refer to these operations as assassinations. They call them initiated actions. Major General Giora Eiland is the Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Planning. Let's define initiated action. That sounds like a little bit of mystifying verbiage to me.
Initiated action means to target someone before he shoots at you, simply because you know that he is preparing his next attack.
Initiated action means to kill someone.
Sometimes.
The Israelis don't just talk about these operations now. They let us spend time with the kind of commando unit which carries out these initiated actions, always in secret, usually at night. If you don't see faces, that's the whole idea. These guys all have a price on their heads. They're training for a specific mission here. They surround their prey, flush him out, and put him out of action. But they don't always go into action like this. Often, it's like this. The commandos are masters of deception and disguise. Since they operate exclusively in Palestinian areas, they become Palestinians to target Palestinians.
We're a special unit that is trained to catch dangerous terrorists. You catch one person, you don't really need a tank. You want to bring him in alive.
They prefer to bring him in alive whenever possible. Here's how they do it. Watch the surveillance footage carefully. See those two Arab men walking up the street? They're not Arabs at all. They're Israeli soldiers in disguise. Now keep an eye on the Palestinian leaning against the car. He is about to be arrested. But these days, with Palestinians controlling so many of their own towns and villages, it's increasingly difficult for Israelis to make arrests, so there are a lot fewer of these, and many more assassinations. There have been at least a dozen since the campaign began last November. On November 9th, Israeli intelligence tracked the Palestinian gunman who they say was on his way to attack an Israeli position. They knew where he would be, at what time, in exactly which car, and a helicopter gunship did the rest. 2 rockets hit his car, killing him instantly. 2 elderly Palestinian women walking along the road were also killed. That was the first operation. The same method was used a few weeks ago. A helicopter chased and killed a man the Israelis called a Hezbollah terrorist operating in the Gaza Strip. In November, a bomb maker working for Hamas was driving through the West Bank town of Nablus when his headrest exploded. Arafat's forces quickly arrested a Palestinian they accused of collaborating with the Israelis on this operation. He and another alleged collaborator were tried and dealt with the same day. In December, a Palestinian activist answered his mobile phone on the West Bank. The Israelis were calling. The phone exploded, blowing his head off. Human rights organizations have expressed outrage over these state-sponsored assassinations, saying they violate international law. And it's not just human rights groups. Many Israelis find these operations difficult to digest. Author Yossi Melman, an internationally renowned authority on Israeli security and intelligence, says it's no way for Israel to behave, no matter what the provocation.
But what's the alternative? What would you suggest?
I would suggest that a democratic country, a democratic state, cannot use methods of state terrorism. I mean, there are certain price that a democracy has to pay in order to be a democracy. We don't want to be like our enemies.
But in fact, this is by no means a new Israeli policy. After the murder of Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympics in Munich, the Mossad tracked down the PLO gunmen behind the massacre and picked them off one by one in Rome, Paris, Cyprus, Beirut.
Israel has assassinated enemies for many, many years. Is there any difference to the policy now, to what's happening now, compared to what Israel did in the past?
No, I don't accept the term assassination. Actually, what we do is attacking people that fight against us.
And the fighting this time, the general insists, is far fiercer than in the past.
This is not an intifada. This is not a popular uprising. Actually, this is a combat situation.
A combat situation in which more than 40 Israeli civilians have been killed since October, many in suicide bombings, many in drive-by shootings on the West Bank. And the bomber or the gunman doesn't have the slightest idea who he's killing. He either wades into a crowd or shoots at a car, suspecting that the people inside are settlers, occupiers, in his terms, legitimate targets. 15 of the Israelis buried these last months have been women or children. And that, the Israeli generals will tell you, is the essential difference. When they target a Palestinian, they know exactly whom they're hitting and why.
If you have a very solid information that this kind of attack is planned, and you know exactly where the people who are going to participate in this attack, and the only way to prevent this attack is by shooting them first, I don't see anything bad about that.
Did the Israelis get it wrong when they assassinated this man, Dr. Thabit, a Palestinian dentist and a leader of Yasser Arafat's party on the West Bank? Israeli friends of his, like Yehudit Harel, who worked with him in the peace movement, say the Israeli army killed a potential ally.
He believed in peace, and I remember the first meeting he told us that he always believed in a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
This is my husband in his
In fact, Dr. Thabit and his wife Siham had many Israeli friends.
All this family with me and my husband are Israeli.
That's the Thabit's house there, and from it, there's a clear line of sight to the Israeli border just 250 yards away. That's the border down at the end of the road behind me. On the morning of December 31st, Dr. Thabit was backing up his driveway. He was on his way to work. At that very moment, a covert truck and an Israeli jeep stopped at the end of the road on the Israeli side of the border. Israeli soldiers opened fire. Dr. Thabit's arm was almost severed and 4 bullets hit him in the back. He didn't have a chance. He was pulled from his bullet-riddled car and rushed off to the local hospital where doctors, many of whom were his personal friends, struggled in vain to save him.
Did you or your husband have any idea that your husband was in trouble, that the Israelis were out to get him?
Never. I didn't think for a minute, for a second, because he have no bodyguards, no guns, no weapons with him.
What Mrs. Harel remembers most about Dr. Thabit was that when her son, an Israeli soldier, was killed in a car crash, he came to the funeral, an Israeli army funeral, which she says was
indicative of the fact that he stopped regarding us as enemies.
Must have been very complicated for you to deal with when your army killed your friend.
It was a shock, it was a terrible pain. I was mourning. I lost somebody who was dear to me, and a lot of guilt feelings, of course, evoked. I mean, how come we murdered somebody who trusted us?
We've spoken to Israeli peace activists who insist that Dr. Thabit was a political leader, not a military one, that he had many Israeli friends and patients, and that he was very active in the peace movement.
You can either believe me or not. Dr. Thabit, like some of other people, were personally involved in terrorist activities against Israelis. We rely our information on a very good and basic and solid intelligence. Unfortunately, I cannot give you this intelligence, especially not on camera. But that Dr. Thabit was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde at the same time.
Even if Israeli intelligence is correct that Dr. Thabit was responsible for launching attacks on Israeli civilians and soldiers, do you think liquidating him was wise?
No, I don't think it was wise. Neither liquidating all the others was not wise. This policy, I think, is wrong.
Okay. If I were supporting the policy of assassinations, I might say, this assassination policy certainly isn't foolproof, but if it can save any Israeli lives, it's worth continuing.
I would say yes. If it saves Israeli life, yes, but it doesn't. It's counterproductive. It's not deterring the other side. and it leads Israel nowhere, just to a cycle of violence and revenge and counter-revenge.
Revenge was all Dr. Thabit's nephew Masalma could think about after his uncle was killed. He wouldn't leave the graveside, stopped eating and sleeping. He became a man obsessed. Kill Israelis, any Israelis. He got his chance here at the Abu Nidal restaurant. 3 weeks after Dr. Thabit's death, 2 young Israeli businessmen came to Tulkarm to do some shopping. They stopped for lunch here and were overheard speaking Hebrew. Maslama and his friends rushed over. They let the Israelis finish their meal and then invited them to take a drive.
What happened then?
It didn't take much time. We asked them to leave the car, to get out of the car, and so they did.
Do you think they knew that you were going to kill them?
I believe that they understood that they were about to die.
The 2 young Israelis standing on a deserted road outside Tulkarm pleaded for their lives.
Did you shoot both of the Israelis?
I know I shot one of them. I was tense. Killing a person isn't easy, like in a movie. Everything happened very quickly. All I know is that in the end, both of them were dead.
Fearing Israeli retaliation, Masalama turned himself in to the Palestinian authorities, who've been holding him in a form of protective custody. They say they plan to charge him with a crime. The Israelis don't believe it for a minute.
Did you feel better knowing that you had killed 2 Israelis?
I only felt that I had completed my job. I had avenged my uncle.
Do you consider the possibility that when you kill someone, even if it was, from your point of view, a perfectly justified and logical killing, that the Palestinians will then make a revenge attack against Israelis?
They don't need a revenge. Actually, they do it without any reason. They kill Israelis because they are Israelis. And I can ask you, suppose you have reason to believe that if you target a specific man like Tabet or like anyone else, you can save at least the life of one Israeli civilian. That can be a man, a woman, or a child. Would you do it?